And now on the line is Senator Pauline O'Reilly from the Green Party. Welcome back to Near FM, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Darren.
Okay, I last spoke to you on Near FM only 6 weeks ago, Pauline, and in that interview we spoke about COP27. Today we're going to talk about another COP that was held last month in December. This might be a very simplistic question, Pauline, but can you tell our listeners what is the difference between the two COPs that we have had in the last 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the COP is generally regarded as the climate conference, and then the COP15 or the Biodiversity Conference is in relation to biodiversity loss, and the two are related, but they're not completely the same thing, because biodiversity is about nature and the loss of nature, whereas climate is, our changing weather patterns based on man-made, man-made, I suppose, emissions increases.
Okay, COP15 was about biodiversity. Can you tell me if you were happy with what was agreed at COP15, Pauline?
Yeah, I think it was momentous, and so it's not legally binding. I suppose that's the first thing to say, and obviously it's always better if things are legally binding, but it is actually quite difficult to make something global legally binding anyway. But this puts into place a lot of reporting and obligations on people to come back and countries to come back to say what they have done. It's a little bit like the Paris Climate Agreement a number of years ago, which people will often hear mentioned. And so the main kind of agreements at this biodiversity conference were that all countries would agree to a global land conservation of 30% and 30% of our oceans. So that's quite a large chunk of our land that would be conserved for nature. And then on top of that, the second thing, so that's kind of called the 30 by 30. And then on top of that is 30 billion euro from developed countries for developing countries by the year 2030. So that's the other kind of big agreement that was made at COP15, the Biodiversity COP.
Okay, I am personally interested in the issue of biodiversity, particularly in Ireland and also in Africa, Pauline, and I include Africa because there is, I believe, a huge need for it more on the continent of Africa, even more than in Europe generally, I think. Do Africans in Africa and people living in the global south in general, Pauline, have cause to be happy with the recent COP15, do you think?
As I say, it would be much better if it was legally binding, but I do think there's a huge concern for people living along the equator in particular, because of the high temperatures that really impact on nature. And the high temperatures, have seen record numbers of droughts, and that is a large part a creation of climate. It's created because of climate change. So it's number one, I suppose it's causing death and destruction and a lot of migration because people can't survive, because there is food insecurity. People can't grow what they used to be able to grow in many places. And then the other big issue, of course, is that developed countries continue to make money, and developing countries have kind of had their natural resources stripped from them by developed countries. So they're finding it very difficult to cope with the kind of financial burden. So I think that there's a recognition from the Biodiversity COP that developed countries do have to pay for what has happened. But I would like to see that things happen an awful lot quicker. And sometimes climate overshadows biodiversity when actually the two should be really spoken about with equal importance. And they have such a massive impact on human life and animal life. So, yeah, I would say that there is some hope there, but we need to see a lot more.
Okay, I know it's an ongoing question, the question of funding, particularly in developing countries for biodiversity. Okay, to talk a bit about Ireland, I know, as you told me before, that every county and city council in Ireland now has a biodiversity officer, and this is great news, I think. But I think that the funding that they have to bring in big changes with biodiversity is not very big. With COP15 and bearing in mind the big citizens' assembly we had in biodiversity recently, are you confident, Pauline, that over the next few years we are really going to see a lot more biodiversity in Ireland? And I don't just mean like on farms.
Yeah, I think, I think number one, it is important to say about farming that 60% of the land is private and so is farmed. And so we have put in significant funding in relation to some schemes that will help with biodiversity and also make sure that farmers are paid for their work. And up to 50,000 farmers will be recipients of a different kind of payment, which would be an agri-environmental one. But on top of that, as you say, we have funded biodiversity officers for every council, and there's funding that comes through in kind of waves, I suppose, from departments. We've had to push really hard to get funding for biodiversity through government, and we have seen an increase, a doubling of the budget for the National Parks and Wildlife Services, which also affects a lot of counties. But I do think that certainly the more money we can put towards biodiversity, the better. I mean, only today there's a report out in the Irish Times, and that's a local project in Galway, local to me that is, where they've seen that butterflies and dragonflies that would have been migrating to the east of the country are now migrating to the west and the north of the country, which would be traditionally kind of colder areas and wetter areas. And that's because of the kind of change in climate that we have. So we can see on the ground in everyday communities that biodiversity loss is impacting us. But I certainly know when I look out my window, we have biodiversity projects in our city, and that's because I think that staff just generally across the city council are taking different measures when it comes to dealing with public parks. So the number one thing used to be before, let's try and mow the grass as much as possible. Let's, use as many pesticides as possible. And I definitely see that staff overall just take a different approach to that, because we need to mow our grass less, and that's the only way to ensure that you have, more species growing. So it is about funding, but it is also about a different mindset and a different approach, and I think we are seeing that at least.
Okay, just I'll talk to you again about biodiversity on Near FM because it is an interest of mine. But just one other related issue, and there's kind of two parts to this. But I was delighted to see the new initiative recently to combat cigarette butt pollution. I am a smoker, and the issue of cigarette butt pollution only registered with me in the last year or so. And I did an interview on Near FM about it with a Canadian-based campaigner, Lisa Chen, from her group Let's Talk Butts. I don't know if you know of her, but can you tell our listeners on Near FM, Pauline, a bit more about this initiative and why it's a good thing?
Well, I mean, when we see actually an awful lot of waste, we're cutting down on a lot of waste now, and we're having a lot of new initiatives like bottle return scheme that are going to come into place. So that's all of the plastic waste kind of taken care of. But there's, damaging substances in cigarettes for one thing. A lot of it gets washed into our waterways, and we have record, I suppose, numbers of polluted waters in Ireland, damage to fish stocks, but also that goes into what we eat. And cigarettes, if you look around you, cigarettes are one of the things that you notice most. And any of us who've been on litter picks, you pick up constant cigarette butts. And so this is about, putting the cost back onto the cigarette companies for that waste and stopping that waste from happening in the first place.
Yeah, I understand cigarettes are the most common form of pollution on the ground and in the sea. When I interviewed Lisa Chen from Let's Talk Butts last year, she told me that in some countries the cigarette companies have what is called pocket ashtrays, As I said, I smoke cigarettes, and since Lisa told me about those pocket ashtrays, I now have one. I got it on eBay. I think it would be great and progressive if cigarette companies would supply pocket ashtrays with every cigarette box. Do you have an opinion on this, Pauline?
Well, look, I'd say you know more about this than I do by the sounds of things, because they sound like a great idea to me. I'm not a smoker, but I can certainly see that that would make a lot of sense, because what happens is that people look around them. It's at that a particular point that they are putting out their cigarette. They don't see any way to dispose of it at that point, and that's really why they throw it on the ground. I kind of think it should be treated um, as people who have, dogs, and they have to pick up their dog poo. In the same way, you should have to pick up your cigarette butts, because it has an impact on other people. So I think any innovative solution, I think, would be great. And of course, the other one then, that we're pretty keen to stamp out is disposable vapes as well, disposable plastic vapes, because that's the thing that's kind of taken over now. And so we've legislation coming into place in relation to vapes, and ensuring that people who are underage can't have ready access, that we are cutting down on the flavours, and cutting down on the disposable type of vapes.
Just before you go, Pauline, another related issue. These are all in the same kind of category, I think, these issues. But, like, I heard only recently off a friend of mine that tea bags, most of the tea bag companies in Ireland and around the world, there's actually plastic in the tea bags. Can you tell me, if you know anything about this, Pauline, why do the recycling companies accept tea bags into their brown bins if there is plastic in them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they should, but some tea bag companies now don't use plastic anymore, so it's really important to look out for the tea bag companies. I'm not going to advertise on the show, but there are some big brands that don't use plastic anymore. I know what I had done was to start using tea leaves so that I could cut out the plastic. But even, with different kind of items, like even the compostable bags, they take a different amount of time to decompose. So that can actually damage the compost as well. And so I think that it's really treated as it's such a small amount of plastic. There's probably a lot more microplastics in the ground in general than we'd like to think, but it is there. And overall, maybe they think that the benefit outweighs the negative. But I think the onus is actually on the companies to not have plastic, because, as you say, most people aren't aware of it unless you're keeping a really keen eye on trying to keep your plastic consumption down.
Yeah, it seems to me to be in Ireland to be kind of overlooked area, like I just don't understand. I'm not blaming yourself or anything, but I don't understand why brown bin
Yeah.
companies are allowed except, at least that's the case with where I live in Dublin. The brown bin companies have never told us anything about tea bags, and I think the vast majority of people, I think, assume that tea bags can go into the brown bin, but it turns out I don't know the percentage now of what companies take or use plastic and what companies don't. But it's something that I think yourselves in the Green Party could look out for in future, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair point. I think we've probably been kind of looking at it from the point of view of public awareness and also of trying to change the companies. But certainly there's a point there that they shouldn't be in the compost in the first place. And I think that, most people are trying to do their best. And so it is probably very disappointing when they find out that actually there is plastic in the tea bags, as I say. It's a lot more than it should be, but there's plastic all around us anyway in the earth, which is an unfortunate thing. But we need to make sure it stays out of the compost. But some of that, the companies themselves, they can't, I suppose, police everything. They try their best, but we do need to make sure that people aren't putting plastic in there in the first place. But as you say, a lot of people don't know that about the tea bags.
Yeah, I'll come back to you again in the future and we talk about this again, okay?
Great.
Anis an lína tá an Cllr Daithí Ó Healy ón Comhaontas Glas. A Gaeilge fáilte oscaidí an Cllr?
Gur mágad dar.
Ok, leabhar mé leat den ó dhearnach ar Raidió Gaithí nera bhí na saona agus leabhar muid bhí COP15 ó hinine le an bhí se caite bhí COP eile ar siú COP15. The daibh siúd atá géisteach lína Raidió aniu a Gaithí. An féidir at cuasaí sa chóirtstómh faoi cad is brí leis an bhucail COP agus an sin a ráló cad a bhí an difar idir COP15 agus an ceann is déanaí COP15?
Yeah, cínte. So sure atá géist sa bhucail COP ná Conference of the Parties. So sin sais ulcriniú na tíre ilig atá treis sinú a dhéanamh ar Conra. Agus tá gá Conra den náisiúnta i gceist United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So Tommy Jagan Shaktu ceann is fiche san Arnold Roger ach ag an iver cuaig Marialler Bithéagsúlacht. Agus hosig na shrachna sin sa bhliain 1992 ag an cruinniú mór bhí I Rio sa bhliain sin agus hosig na síneach na gá conraithe sin ag an in 92. Agus ó hinine le tá méidir géirí Cuirhhaim a dhéanamh ar an socrú idirnáisiúnta a rinneachn sin chun deire chur lethra aráide agus deire chur le Cailín Bithéagsúlacht ach go dtí seo tá muid fós ag obair ar tádal chun sin déanta ach tá muid fós ag folaing agus ag dul sa tromí ceart ó thaobh an ólaíocht.
Yeah, just bhí sartí ceiste ort faoi sin. An féidir a tuile sunraí a thuirtún a Gaithí faoi an mo cóir dún mar hir agus mar bhall den Aontas Eorpach a bheith sásta leis an méid a hiite amach le COP15 le déanaí?
I mean, it's so good to be major fannacht ar le galore blin gannach came more like frin conner Bithéagsúlacht agus darnóí an COP seo bhí sé le tarlú ar dús sa bhliain fiche sa fiche sa sin ach darnóí de hála COVID agus friéire hála an cruinniú an bhí caite I Canada. So the gá sin sais I Gaeilge an sin agus Canada Gaeilge le Chéile. Agus I suppose tá daoine sásta gur friéire rinneach céim mór raig agus gáthairthe an socrú faoi trocha agus trocha mar dearan siad. So sin go bhfuil nó for truck faoin géad den talamh agus truck faoin géad den farraige I gcóir Bithéagsúlacht agus is tóca gur bhín tágan an dearcha sin ón cóir le toig teacht ón ólaithe ar I rithna blianta agus friéire tá sé like sucrathe ag na rialtais.
Okay. An sian tú go cóga meach an down has nó an Global South mar derfá orthú spéirde. Cóga meach siad sásta leis an méid hit amach sa COP an sian tú a Gaithí?
Well, I mean, on 5 darlo agus sé tigméid go láidir nachhfuil nachfaní acu gachrad ar wathló a dhéanamh. Agus tá bhí sin tá si de bra ar na tíre ní sever chun nachfaní sin a chur fáil agus bhí sin ceistlánach sa play I Montreal. So, tá sé sin ceistlánach is a politic idirnáisiúnta ar aráide freisin agus feicimid cad arlóig má blochan na tíortha seidlar leis an dúgus a chuirte sin orthú.
Okay,
Mar tá éis a going nach féidir le dhéanamh gan cabhar.
Okay, tá ceiste dul roiig. Okay, tá do feartaí an Comhaontas Glas beagnach 3 bliana sa réalta seo a gaithí. An bhfuil tú mar bhall agus mar Cllr I pártaí an Comhaontas Glas sásta leis an méid oibre atá déanta goibh sa réaltas maidir le Bithéagsúlacht an bhliain fios a bheith roiig agus an bhfuil tú muíach go bheici an gnáthphobal I gcuiteanna in éir afrathe maithe maidir le cuasaí Bithéagsúlachta sa blianta atá teachráin?
Yeah, time. I mean, Malcolm Noonan agreeing mar ara again sir on NPWS and National Parks and Wildlife Service agus on rud is mó is stoka dulgus is mó ag came seo rin na bliana fihe agus fihe hain agus fihe do ná an achfaní oil agus an chorus atá going a lodgeru a houseú agus na designations agus an over galore a dhéanamh níos topic agus sin atá géinteige tá fásmór sa bheith daoine tá fostaithe sa service agus freisin tá agriíocht nua a chur chéile so tá structure nua an atá níos congrí den achfaní nua atá teachtas teach. So sin is ook an bon principle go meg an service sin in an over dhéanamh agus dar nói an darród ná go meg an choras umláin so gab canné den rialtas ag gobar sa trocéine agus sin cuid an táfachta.
Okay, tá is a gom gúil na cór le chundathe in éir na cór béim I bhhad níos mó Bithéagsúlachta sa lá tá nniuán agus ceapan se áfach nach bhfuil lán muoinú acu chun go leor rudí dhéanamh an bhfuil tú sásta leis an muoinú atá ar fáil in éir an faoi láthair ar an ábhar?
I mean tá is dúlan den a cóirlaí chunta tá muidine finneáil taréis socrú ar an plan sgrinne agus muoinú a chur leis so tá sé sa léir an plan bhí sé sa léir agus nuair thuig an direct amach go dtí an pobl gur bhín an ceisleornach sa plan an ag dóchan daoine fosta chun ar chur bhaim agus socrú mi ní an oleg ag cruine cóirla go méid agus go méid fuan seair daoine ag obair ar an plan Bithéagsúlacht a chur bhaim sa chunta so sin socrú mór I bhíonn atá déanta going go méid gachród a bhí lecha sa plan go méid na achfaní chur ar fáil ach ní pásantar furin I bhíonn cuid is mó chun é dhéanamh.
Táim sin mar cónaí a bhain gá freisin mar zóide so tásúla gom sa blianta tá rón go bhheicimiid a bhhad níos mó plandaí agus le héad sa phobal. So just chun teachta dro dhearan aglah a gaithí an bhuis sé sort suas do gach cóirla chunda in éireann chun obair féin I dhéanamh nó an bhfuil aon leile an bhfuil tuile takeíochta ar fáil dóibh le do cóirla chundathe?
Well, no, I mean, tá takeíocht on stage freshen on Raidió Lornach on NPWS like tá Quincy an ar féidir lo idiú sáid cinse tá sin ar fáil.